This is Basket Case Clubs, CPR Group's podcast where we turn basket case clubs into showcase clubs. Good morning everyone and welcome along to our webinar this morning. My name's Michael Connolly and it is, as usual, my absolute pleasure to be with you today and to share some really fascinating information about how to make clubs better and stronger. I can see we've got a few people who've already said hello in the chat, so good morning Anne and good morning Claire, and we've got a few people from all over the country today. So why don't you jump into the chat, introduce yourself to everyone else who's here so that you can see who's taking part in this session today. And if you've got any questions as we're going along, just pop them straight in there as we're going through. You don't need to wait until we get to a question section, and I'll pause every now and again and take questions. There's quite a bit to get through this morning, so if we don't have a chance to get through everything, I promise that we'll get back to you with any questions that go unanswered at the end of the session, but I'll do my best to touch on everything as we go. So I'd like to begin, as we always do, acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land where everyone is joining us from today. So today I am in beautiful Perth. So it's beachside where I am here. So it's Noongar, part of the Noongar Nation, and the Whadjuk people are the traditional custodians of this area. And it always makes me proud. I've got some family here and it makes me so proud when I get to come and jump in the surf with my brother and his family, and it's wonderful over here. So it's a great place, and I have been here for a few days already and doing some work all about land. And so it's great that we are now looking after the land that we recreate on, that we play on, that our community organisations operate from. And it's certainly wonderful that we have such a beautiful country. So I feel connected to it and I hope you do as well. So today we're talking about scaling your club, and I think we've called the session Scaling Your Club for Success, because success is not necessarily something that our organisations think about maybe enough. I think we think not necessarily about success or about thriving and being really vital, but sometimes it's just the status quo. We just want to keep getting along, keep doing what we're doing. And I want to challenge that today. I want to let you know that every organisation has opportunities to grow somehow. Now, if you're interested in scaling your club or your community organisation because you're looking literally for membership growth, great, that's fantastic, we'll touch on that. But if you're looking for quality growth, then that's still growth. So you might not necessarily have the desire or the capacity to grow in the number of members that you've got, but it doesn't mean that growth potential is limited, and it certainly doesn't mean that you've hit the ceiling of success. So what I want to do today is unpack what are the factors that make a successful organisation, but also what does scaling look like? So a lot of the examples that I'll use today are grounded in sporting organisations, and that's largely because when I look through the groups that we've got, a lot of you are from sporting organisations or help represent sporting organisations through a council or a peak body. But everything that I'm talking about applies equally well to charities, to not-for-profit student associations, to community organisations. The numbers are a little bit different. So I want you to see yourself, not necessarily when I'm talking about numbers that apply more specifically to sporting organisations, but in some of the challenges and opportunities that you'll see at each level of growth in community organisations. So as I like to do, I'd like to begin the session by reminding you all of what the term not-for-profit means. So I've got a little poll here that we can get into. So the poll is going to ask you, what does the term not-for-profit really mean? And the answers are, let me just launch that for you there. There we go. So the answers here are, I don't know, we're not allowed to turn a profit, we're unable to share our profit with our members, we can only make a maximum of 150 grand in any year, or we're only allowed to have a maximum of, well, any amount. I've put $1 million there. But jump in and put your answers in there, and keep your device with you as you go through the session this afternoon as well, because I will have a few polls here and there to test where you're sitting, not necessarily to test your knowledge, but to test where you're sitting. So this is great. As the numbers come in, I'll give you another second or two to pop your details in. This is really, really good. Okay, so typically the answers here are a little bit all over the map. Today, it looks like most of you are on the same page. So the first question there that says, sorry, the first answer, I don't know, is actually a really hard one for us humans to answer, because we feel that it could be a sign of weakness if we say we don't know. But it's actually a really good answer, because it means I don't know, and maybe there's something here that I can learn. And maybe there's also something that I can consider is very helpful for me to be able to learn so I can share that with others. So there you go. I'll share those results with you. And you can see that the majority of you got this right. We're unable to share our profit with our members. So that's what not-for-profit really means. So there's actually two parts to it. The first one is we're not allowed to share our profit with our members, which would be akin to paying dividends to shareholders if it was a for-profit company. So that's the main difference. But then that begs the question, if we can't share our profit, which is if we have revenue that exceeds our expenses, if we can't share that with our members, what do we do with it? And that's what I call the self-limiting factor of not-for-profitness. Any extra money that you make as a community organisation has to go back in to delivering the objects in your constitution. So those objects in your constitution say why you exist. So we exist for the purposes of providing netball, touch football. We're a men's shed. We exist for the purposes of providing our charitable purpose, which might be advancing education, advancing public health. So that's where the money needs to go. So any additional money you make as profit will always go back into doing what you do better. So better services, better facilities, better equipment, better people, better marketing, better advertising, better systems, better processes. This is where profit goes. So I like to say, not for profit doesn't mean no profit. It's actually really, really important. And I think that I often say profit is where growth lives. So if you just want to keep doing the same thing and maintain the status quo, fine. You can do that without making any additional money. But if you want to do things differently, if you want to do new things, then that's where profit can really help. So although it's okay to make profit, a lot of people still think that it's a bit of a taboo term. And sometimes even say, well, we don't call it a profit, we call it surplus because we're not for profit. Same thing. Like it's when you take away expenses from our revenue, that's what we're talking about. And that's where we can grow. So what we're talking about then, and we say this all the time, clubs are businesses. So we don't shy away from that. We don't say you've got to run your club like a business. You have to run your club as the business it is. It's just that the shape of the business, the structure of the business is a not-for-profit business. So you may be an incorporated association, you may be a charity registered with the Australian Charities and Non-Profits Commission, you may be an unincorporated association that's looking to incorporate. All of you are businesses. Now, the reason that's the case is you sell things, you make money, and then you deliver a service, sometimes some products as well, some food, some drink, some merchandise. But even if that money is coming from, say, government or council for support that you're providing, and then you're delivering the service to the community, to other people, it's still business. It's just that the customer and the recipient of the service are different. But that's no different even in sport, where it might be the parents who pay the bill and the children who participate in sport. It's all business. Now, the reason that I can confidently say that it's business, and I don't want to say run your club like a business, run your club as the business that it is again, this is something that is not necessarily seen as an opportunity. We don't necessarily think we've got an opportunity to improve how successful we are on our own measures. We can determine how we want to be measured in terms of success. So let's do that. Let's look at some of the factors of business that can help us to grow. I often talk about the barbecue problem. Now, luckily, I don't get invited to many barbecues because I'm too busy running around with kids. But I often say, how do I define what it is that we do at CPR Group? It's sometimes really, really difficult because there's a lot to it. But if we narrow it down, this is really what we're doing. We are trying to help clubs and community organisations and charities and not-for-profits of all shapes and sizes become better businesses. Because if they're better businesses, it means that they are better able to serve their communities. And ultimately, that's what we want. We don't do, as volunteers, we don't do what we do for the money because there isn't any money. We do what we do for the fact that we feel that we're giving. We feel that we are contributing to society, and that's why we want to stay involved. All of that is true, but we're still a business. Now, to demonstrate that we're still a business, I want to ask you our next poll. And Tony, maybe you missed that one because... Anyway, I'll launch the next one and hopefully you'll be able to see this one as it comes up. So this one asks you about how much money you've got in the bank. Now I'm interested in this one because it is, here we go, money in the bank, there we go. I'll launch that one for you. So have you got less than $1,000 in the bank, or have you got between $1,000 and $10,000, or 10 to 50, or 50 to 150, or even more than $150,000? So straight away the first person jumped in there and said somewhere between 50 and 150. Now, if you're doing you were running a bad business, then you'd be unlikely to have that much money in the bank. But we also deal with some community organisations that turn over, I don't know, $25 million a year. We've got some charities that we work with that are even bigger than that. Remember that not-for-profit doesn't mean no profit, so it's okay to have money in the bank, to have reserves. In our type of business, though, it's always important that you understand why that money is in the bank. So I'll end that one now and show you how this is looking. We've got a few of you have 1 to 10, a few of you 10 to 50, and a couple of you over 50 grand. So that's really good. But don't let the money in the bank be what drives you. We had a discussion a few weeks ago with a club president who said that at the end of her term, her goal was to finish with more money in the bank. He said, okay, that's a noble goal, but why? And she said, what do you mean? Isn't that what I'm supposed to do? So she was preparing to lead that organisation, lead that committee and lead that organisation by saving as much as she could to put more money away. So that would have meant, and she realised this through the conversation, that would have put her in a more difficult situation because she would have been giving more of her time to areas of the operation of that club that weren't the job of the president. They were operational roles that somebody needs to do, but not necessarily the president. But in order to save money, she wanted to do that work herself. So once she realised that we don't just save for the sake of saving, we need to have a goal for our savings. And that's because the money that's coming in is money that our members are putting in. So this is kind of the other side to the definition of not-for-profit. Yes, it's important to have profit because profit is where growth lives, but what does that growth look like? And let's communicate that to our members. The other thing is if a member is paying you, I don't know, let's say $300 a year for membership, then it's important that they feel that they have received at least $300 in value. Feel that they have received $300 in value. It doesn't necessarily need to cost you $300 or more. So if you have ways that you're saving or ways that you're bolstering the income that you're receiving from membership fees, so through sponsorships, grants a little bit, but grants are kind of money in and money out, through merchandise sales, through diversification, other ways to diversify your revenue streams, then that means that you can still provide a great perception of value but still make profit. So that's probably more of the goal, and that's a little bit more sophisticated than just keep upping your fees, keep trying to make more money from diverse revenue streams. What is that money for? So is it for improving facilities? So maybe you're saving up a whole heap of money. So for those of you who've got close, maybe 100 grand in the bank, are you looking to use that to leverage some grants? So you've got a contribution, then you can go to council, then you go to the state government, then you go to the federal government and say, we're kicking the can, can you kick the can as well? And then do what we call cocktail funding to create enough money to do a bigger project. Or in the case of this club that I'm mentioning, is that money there to help deliver better services? So in this case, because it was a sports club and the president was also the chief first aid officer, she thought, well, if I can do my job by being the ambassador at home game days and away game days, by having professional first aid instead, and we can fund that with the money that we've got in the bank, the organisation will grow. And that's exactly what happened. It wasn't that the amount of money just diminished because all of a sudden they were outsourcing services, in this case first aid services. The organisation strengthened and they were able to grow because of the ambassadorial work that she was able to do as president. So that's so much more important. So yes, we're all businesses. Yes, not-for-profit doesn't mean no profit, but it's important to have a goal for that profit. So how then do we want to grow? What does success look like for us? I was mowing the lawn one afternoon and I was thinking to myself, this barbecue problem, what is it that we do? And I thought, I think that the way that I could explain it is we help get clubs to the next level. I'm like, yes, that's it. That's a great way to explain it. But then I thought, what does getting to the next level mean? And what does this level mean? And it really got me thinking about the depth of the range of organisational, I'll call them levels. So what do these levels look like? So as I was thinking through it, I thought, what's a simple enough number to say, well, let's use that as a gauge for when we're getting to the next level. So as I said, this is more closely related to sporting organisations numbers, but it does apply to other sorts of organisations as well. Now, we might not be talking members, we might be talking recipients of service, because a community centre association, for instance, doesn't need to have a lot of members, but there might be thousands of people that go through that community centre every year. So you can look at it like that as well. But I was then thinking, okay, so what are these levels? What do they look like? How do we define them? How do you know when you're in them, even if it's not to do with the membership number? What does it feel like to be there? And what it feels like to be there is, what are the challenges that you face when you're at that level? Then, how can we turn those challenges into opportunities? So what are the opportunities that we've got to get to the next level? And what does that look like? But even more than just getting to the next level, what does being at this level feel like in terms of what are the opportunities that we've got here to be more successful? So I came up with 4 levels, but I'm cheating because there's actually also a level 0. So level 0, I call the startups. So the startups are absolutely in survival mode. The way that we define a startup is that they've usually got less than 20 members. Now, the reason I picked 20 members is because at 20 members, one family moving away or leaving your organization can have a material impact on your viability, your ability to actually exist as an organization, because that could be financial, but it could even be the number of members you've got falls below the number of members that you need to be an incorporated association. So that's why these clubs are really in survival mode. So how do we define them then? Okay, so it's up to about 20 members, and this number is not fixed because it more then becomes about how you feel. So you can see there that the main challenges that these organisations have is just being here next week, making sure we keep everyone together. An example here is a small senior cricket club that might only have one team, the sort of cricket club that is every week chasing around to try and get enough players to get a team on the pitch. So it's being here next week, you're really worried about that. Having only a few members also means that you've got a very limited number of volunteers. So it's hard to get people to chip in. So what we find is the committees of these groups are often the founders, and they are often buried doing everything. So they're doing all of the governance and all of the operations. The opportunity then is to get to the next level, is to be bold. When you've got nothing to lose. So why not bet everything on something? So I call this betting the farm. And betting the farm on what? Marketing to get from where we are to the next level. So we're trying to achieve critical mass. I don't necessarily think that when we get to level 1 yet they have achieved, or they've successfully achieved critical mass, but we're starting to get close by the time we get here. So I call these the infants. These are really, they're beyond startup mode, but they're still in infant mode. So there's still a lot of growth. So this is kind of between around 20 and around 60 members. And at this point, you start to realize that we're going to need to systemize things. So probably a big focus here then is systemization. So the challenges here are not necessarily existing next week, but it's existing next year. So if you're in an infant stage, what you'll feel, even if the numbers aren't exactly right, is that every year coming up to the AGM, you're thinking, oh, is somebody going to run? Are we going to get a president? Are we going to get a secretary? So you're really worried about the continuity of the club from one year or one season to the next. At this level, because you don't have that critical mass, unless you have done the systems focus, or the bottom point there about the opportunity to automate and streamline your operations, unless you've done that, you don't necessarily have enough brand recognition or enough contacts with councils and state governments, so grants become are at this level still difficult to attract. But now we're getting to the opportunity to achieve critical mass, and critical mass feels like knowing that we can breathe a sigh of relief that we're going to be here next week and we're going to be here next year. We're starting to see some depth in the numbers of people who are keen to put their hand up and help in some capacity, which takes us to level 2, and I call these the villages. At this level, it's all about stability. Now, in the previous levels, I talked about the numbers. I said up to about 20, and then between about 20 and about 60. But for these guys, that number is bold and that number is underlined. It's 150 members, and that's a really, really important number because of evolutionary biology. Interestingly, as tribes of humans developed and were nomadic and moved around the country, once they got to this number of 150, they started to splinter off. And that's because the number 150 is the number of people that I can keep in my head. So I can properly know 150 people. So I've got a friend, his name is Matt. Matt's wife is Jane. They have 3 kids. Matt prefers Belgian beer over Australian beer. So I know them. But Matt and Jane's family takes up 5 people in my mind. So that's 5 of the people I can know. Once it gets beyond 150, we don't know everyone. So when we have our Facebook friends, these aren't really people that we know properly. These are people that we know of or that we're connected to somehow, but we don't know much about them to say, yes, they are properly part of our nomadic tribe. Once we get to 150, or once our prehistoric ancestors got to 150, a rival alpha male and a rival alpha female would typically start to emerge through the ranks. There would be infighting, and typically the groups would splinter. And we still see this in sport. We see some organisations, and there are some specific types of organisations that we see to start to splinter when they get to that level. So if you have seen an organisation that breaks away, we're a breakaway club, I can almost guarantee that it happened around that number, 150. The challenge here is that we sometimes feel that that community connection and the feeling like the village is more important to us than growth, because we want to keep everything the same. We want to keep it in the family. And that can be a risk. The opportunities here, though, are to leverage that, the loyalty that we've got in this village atmosphere, to create more, to build more volunteers, to build more support for our organisation, because we're all in it for the same reason and we all know each other. But it's at this point that the workforce becomes more important as well. A workforce, you can't do everything for 150 people. For 20, the founders, they can do okay. The challenge, the villages that really struggle are the ones that still only have a very small number of volunteers, and they're still trying to do everything themselves, which is a massive challenge for them. So we don't want them to have to do that. So then we get to level 3, and these are the expanders. This is probably the most exciting level, but one of the challenges here is probably the greatest. So this is when we've grown above 150 and we scale up to about 700. So this is really that scaling mode, but this is probably where the most change needs to happen. So the focus here, as you can see, is on building traction. The biggest challenge here, and why I said this is probably the most challenging stage, is that at this point, once a club has grown beyond that magic number of 150, they often still try and run. They don't know, and this is why I'm making such a big thing of it. They don't necessarily know that things have changed, and they don't know everyone, yet they think that they still do. They think that they can still run the organisation in the same way that they did when it was a village. You can't. You need more help. You need more support. The opportunity then is, as the organisation grows, we can leverage our member networks. Now, this is social networking, but in its truest sense, in its truest definition. So before we had social media, so doing social networking through social media, there already was social networking. So what that means is that I know a couple of people, but I don't know their network. But because I know them, if I can coordinate with them, then we as an organisation have access to their network, and then it grows like a massive tree out from under that. That's where we've got great opportunities, when we can use the depth of our tendrils through the people that we know to get access to the people that they know. So that's both within the organisation, but it's also from a marketing perspective as well. I mentioned gaining traction at this point. Now, because we've grown, we're starting to become a force to be reckoned with. And so that means that we start to get traction in the discussions that we're having with our landlord, typically our council. But it also means that we've got better access to grants. We've got better access to making more money by diversifying our revenue streams, because we have a bigger customer base. That's fantastic, because the additional money that we're making enables us to do more outsourcing. So in exactly the same way as I explained the president starting to outsource her role as first aid officer, that's where these opportunities really start to open up. So if that's the most exciting, then probably the most corporate, I call the institution. So this is where we've really started to achieve synergy. So once we get over, and again, we're back to about 700 members, that number becomes more relevant or more related to how things feel. So our opportunities and our challenges that we feel, than the exact number. But at this point, this is when we can start to trade on our brand. So some of the massive clubs that you see, the green and white striped shirts that run onto the rugby field and win all the time, that attract all of the members, it's often the green and white stripes that attract people. It's the brand that brings people in because they are achieving success. Doesn't mean they will always achieve success. Life can be a bit of a roller coaster. So it's important to understand what the challenges at this level and the opportunities are so that we can stay there. Once we get there, we can stay there and even continue to grow. The challenge here is one of, as I say, indigestion more than starvation. So you typically, success begets success. So often more members are attracted to these sorts of organisations because they're successful. But that can make challenges when it comes to just fitting everyone in. So if we are a rugby club, for instance, and we've got access to 4 fields, there is a maximum number of members that we can comfortably accommodate. If we start going over that, we'll have players sitting on the bench. We will have potentially to turn members away. Those are some painful decisions to have to make. But then growth opportunities that exist there are looking at becoming a multi-campus club. We don't just have to operate in the one place. We can grow from there. A really, really important point about the institutions though, and hopefully this has already happened through the expander phase, but by the time we get to being an institution, you really do need paid help. It's very, very difficult to run an organisation of this size with all volunteers. Now, there have been organisations that, and there still are organisations that can run or have run purely volunteer based. But what does the volunteer bench strength look like? While we've got Merv and Susie, a husband and wife, they may even be the founders of the club when they were the infants many, many years ago, and they're still involved. They still give so much of their time and so much of their hearts and so much of their minds and so much of their toil to their club. But who's waiting in the wings to take over from them when they take that step back? It's very unlikely that it will be volunteers. The nature of volunteering has changed. We know that even through COVID, it changed dramatically and volunteering dropped off and it has not recovered to pre-COVID levels. I'm wondering if it ever will, but I'm also wondering if we get this right, if we know about scaling and we know where we want to be and we know how we want to be serving our communities, do we have to get it back there or can we outsource? Can we find those jobs that volunteers don't want to do anymore, and in some cases, I believe, shouldn't be doing anymore? Is going and cleaning the toilets after a massive event a job that we really want a volunteer to do, or is that something that we can outsource? Is spending 20 hours a week doing the bookkeeping something that we want a volunteer treasurer doing over and above their family commitments and their work commitments? Or is that something that we can put in a nice, neat little package and outsource because we are running a good business? So all of this is about running a good business. So as I said, this is also about capitalizing on your brand here. So if you are still looking to expand and maybe taking on more facilities and growing, potentially exponentially, then now's the opportunity to be trading on the success of our brand. We go back to a systems focus here though. So we've got an employee focus and a systems focus here, because in the corporate world, we have moved, especially with the advent of AI and AI being so ubiquitous now in business, in our home lives. You don't Google a recipe anymore. We go and look up ChatGPT to give me a recipe for some Moroccan chicken with a hint of some spice from South America. Yeah, and we will get it. So that's fantastic. But how can we be using that effectively in our club development roles as well? So we need to have that focus on automation, on systems development, as well as having people, the depth of people, and many of those will start to become paid, especially at this level. So let's go back and have a look now. And I want you to consider what level you are at. So I'm going to run the next poll here. There we go. So let me launch that one for you. So jump in there and let me know where you sit on this club levels. If you are a community organisation, then you can read this how you like. So it might then be the number of people that your organisation supports. So not necessarily directly members, and that's perfectly okay as well. Okay, so what we also find here is that sometimes this question is hard to answer because we don't necessarily know. So you can focus in on what it feels like. So I'll end that. Oh, I've got a couple more coming in. And obviously for those of you from councils or peak bodies, it's going to be hard for you, but think of an organisation to maybe pick one that you're involved in there as well. Okay, this is great. I'll end that one there. If you didn't get a chance to pop it into the poll, that's okay. But you can see we've got level 0 there. Okay, so that's great. Hopefully that explanation was helpful for you. Some level 1s and some level 2s. So that's fun. Especially at level 2, that's where it really feels like home. And we often talk about the third place. So we've got home, we've got work. What is our third place? What's the other place we go to get a sense of community? That in the old days, that was predominantly church. Now it's predominantly where we go for community connection. So that community connection is very often our sports club or our community organisation. So that's why that village level can be so attractive. But if you want to grow beyond that, then it's important to understand where your growth opportunities do lie. So as I continue now, I want you to just give a moment to think about anything that you want to put into the chat here. So did that ring true? Do you see yourself having those opportunities, facing those challenges? Does it feel right for where you are? So Tina said, we are level 2, but often drop back to level 1 and have to rebuild each year as members and volunteers change. So that's really tricky, Tina, isn't it? You probably feel that transition every time when you are, I'd say you're almost teeter-tottering on that line of having achieved critical mass, so that you achieve it and you feel good, but then it drops back down. So that being at that level can be a real challenge. As you get closer to 150, so probably over 100 for you, if you're hovering around that, maybe 50 to 80 mark, it'll probably be once you get over 100, that's when you start to feel that you've got a bit of a buffer. So you feel that you've got enough extra people in there willing to put up their hands and provide a bit of support. So moving on then, how do we consider what we want to do as far as growth goes? So in the interest of time, I just want you to think about these questions, but I want you to today I want you to take them back to your committees and the other people that you work with to have this discussion. Because when we talk about growth and when we talk about scaling, often it seems like this massive task that is almost insurmountable. But the reason it seems insurmountable is because we haven't actually defined the challenge properly. So what these 4 questions do is help you define the challenge, and they help you uncover the opportunities that you have. So the first question is really simple. How many members do you currently have? Now, given that all incorporated associations need to have a register of members, hopefully this is a really easy question for you, but you may need to go and interrogate a few data sources. The way that you even count members here might change as well. So if you're an organisation where the whole family is involved, so some community organisations, some cultural organisations are like this, where it's the whole family, then each one of those people in the family can count as a member. If, however, you're a sporting organisation, then we might limit this down to just participants, because that's where it becomes actually more easy to set a benchmark for ourselves, to say, all right, that is the benchmark. This is how many players we've got. If we're a gymnastics club, this is how many gymnasts we've got. If we're an athletics club, this is how many athletes we've got. So actually count the number of participants in here as well. That makes it really easy. The next question then is, every organisation has something or some things that limit their capacity for growth. So let's go back to that big rugby club. If that big rugby club has 4 fields, then in some of the calculations that we've done, we estimate that that comfortable level, the number of members per field or players in our club per field, that is sustainable from an environmental impact on the field, lots of feet running up and down on the field, especially through winter when we might not be getting a heap of rain and we don't have great growing weather, means that it has a great impact on the grass. So we've worked out that it's about 220 is a number. Once we go over that, the fields typically aren't getting a rest. And so that's 220 of our members. But remember, that's not going to be 220 players per field on that players per week on that field, because we've also got visiting teams who are going to be there. So we've calculated it, it's the impact based on the number of players per field that we've got. And so that's what we've come up with, about 220. Gives enough of a chance for the fields to rest, give them some water without getting them hammered, And it also means that we've got a little bit of slack in the system if part of a field needs some rehabilitation, for instance, partway through the season. So if that club has 700 members and they've got 4 fields, then, so that's answer to question 1 is 700. 4 fields, so what limits the maximum number of members we could have could be field space. So number 3 then says how many members could we have? So if that's our limiting factor, we know that it's 220 players per field and we know we've got 4 fields, then our theoretical maximum number of members would be 880. So 4 by 220 is 880. Number 4 then is simply what's the difference? So we've got 700, our theoretical maximum is 880. The difference is 180 members. So that's basically our growth potential when we're talking players in this club. When we're talking 180 new members, that number is very different than if we are located in, let's say, the city of Rockingham that has 155,000 residents. If we look at 155,000 residents, how are we going to market to them? Because we think what we've got is for everyone and we need everyone to know about us so that we can get more members. But if we define how many members we can actually accommodate, it makes it so much easier to then say, we don't need 155,000 people and we don't need to get in front of 155,000 people. We only need 180. Then from a marketing perspective, it becomes much easier to say, okay, who are those 180 people? And I guarantee you those 180 people are very much like the 700 that we've already got. So that's when we go back to the social networking and we say, how can we get access to the networks of our people to find more of our people, but people like our typical customer? So when I talk about the typical customer, that goes back to the fact that we're talking about business. Sport is business, clubs are businesses, community organisations are businesses. And when we have that sort of mindset, it means that our approach to marketing becomes much more sophisticated because we're doing exactly the same thing as we would do if we were in business. Our approach to our workforce management, so whether those are volunteers or paid staff, the approach becomes more sophisticated. We know what we're doing. We know that, I've just talked about the facilities, the fields that we've got. We know what we need to do to maintain those fields. We know that they're going to need to be irrigated. We know they're going to need to be lit so that we can play at night, especially because the sun goes down earlier in winter. So we're starting to understand from a business perspective where our opportunities and maybe limitations are. We've got our operations, so the systems and processes and the automation that we've got, but also our operations covers things like our high performance program or our junior development program. So for the really young children who are starting to take part in our activities to begin with, what level of support have we got for them? And then what business systems and processes have we got to make sure that that happens really efficiently and that it's fit for purpose, that it's meeting the wants and desires of our members. So what I want to do now is break into, I'm starting to talk about some of these pillars of success, which is where I'll wrap up. But before I get there, I want to dig into one of them, just one area of one pillar, and that's the finance pillar. So I've mentioned a lot that we're talking about business, that sport is business, clubs are businesses. So let's dig into that, but just in that one area of money. And to do this, I want you to consider what levers we can pull. Now, I call this a 1% exercise, but by going through this, I want to demonstrate to you that you have opportunities, even if you've not necessarily thought about these opportunities, you have opportunities to massively increase your profit by making insignificant or definitely unnoticeable changes to a few of these areas of financial management. So the first one is very simply pricing. So how much are we charging at the moment? And what opportunities for moving what we're charging do we have? So you can see that the first pricing, and I call it the 1% exercise because I only want you to consider a 1% movement in pricing. What difference would it make if you increased your membership fees by just 1%? And do you think you could do that each year? Just 1%, not a lot, not 10%, just 1%. So to give you an example, the club that I mentioned before that might have fees of $300, that would mean going from $300 to $303. The question there, what impact do you think that would have? Do you think that anyone who is happy to pay $300 for membership wouldn't be happy to pay $303? I don't think so. In fact, if they're paying by credit card, the credit card surcharge is already more than that 1%. So it's going to go unnoticed. The next lever then is to start to look at where our money goes. So that's purely where our money's coming in, the first one, and then where our money goes. So the first part of where our money goes are what we call direct costs or costs of goods sold. So sometimes what we do in our financials is we have our revenue and then we deduct our cost of goods sold to get to a point that we call gross profit. So it's revenue minus direct costs. So direct costs are things like if we sell shirts, then it's the cost for us to buy those shirts. If we sell cans of soft drink in our canteen, it's the cost for us to buy those cans of soft drink to put into the fridge in the canteen in the first place. So the question there is, do we think we could save 1% in our cost of goods, in what we're spending on goods? And the question there is, must you use the same suppliers if they won't give you discounts or better terms? You can shop around. We live in a global economy now. I have a dinner on Saturday night. I have a bow tie, but I didn't have one of the right colour. So I jumped onto Amazon, ordered one. It turned up yesterday. So the night before, Tuesday night I ordered it. Wednesday it arrived. So now I've got my beautiful velvet green bow tie because that's what I wanted. So I can shop around. I don't have to go to just one place. So it's actually very easy to save 1%. And as soon as you start talking like that with your suppliers, they say, yeah, sure, I'll save that. By the way, you can actually increase more than 1% on your pricing and you can probably save more than 1%. But for the purpose of the exercise, let's just stick to 1% because everyone can do 1%. Let's take it to the next level. So we've taken out our direct costs. They're the above the line, so the direct costs of what we're selling. And now we go into what we call our overheads. So these are our overall expenses. So each year you need to pay for your auditor to do the audited accounts. So that's an overhead. You need to pay for water and electricity and your lease fees and your insurance. If you've got maintenance on your machinery, putting fuel and oil into the machinery, servicing the machinery. So those are all overheads. Those are now our indirect costs, but they are all the costs of us doing business. And the question there is, can you identify any areas of waste or unnecessary expenses in your overhead costs that have just rolled on from year to year that you could reduce by 1%. So I think, and I mentioned probably the easiest place to start is insurance. And this is not public liability insurance and maybe professional indemnity insurance that you receive from your peak body. So as part of affiliation with a state or national association, very often we receive that level of insurance so that everyone has consistency in the insurance that they've got. But for everything else, for your contents insurance, if you need to insure the buildings, then simply by shopping around, that could give you your overall 1% saving just in one thing. The other thing to look at here is what I call the Netflix effect. So I don't know about you, but at home when I turn the TV on, there always seems to be new subscription services that I'm paying for. That's partly from having a family that's interested in lots of things, but there's a KO subscription, a Netflix subscription, a Paramount Plus subscription, a Disney Plus subscription, a Spotify subscription, an Amazon Prime subscription, and it goes on and on and on. Do we really need all of those subscriptions all of the time? Maybe not. So this is also an opportunity to look at how you've perhaps got systems bloat. You might be subscribing to Microsoft, you might also be subscribing to Google, you might also be subscribing to some Amazon S3 or AWS services that are no longer required. So this is a great chance to go and look at where they are. A penny saved is absolutely a penny earned. And before I explain how much that earned penny can be worth, let me continue. So the fourth pillar is sales volume. Can you sell more things to your customers more often? So what I'm talking about here is understanding that every member and now their family, so every participant, as well as mum, as well as dad, as well as nan, as well as pop, as well as brothers, as well as sisters, as well as aunties and uncles who might come to our facility to watch a game once or twice a season, they are all potential customers. Could we sell more things to them? So I'm not talking about selling more membership here. That would be membership growth, and we've dealt with that in the previous exercise. Now I'm talking about selling more stuff. So if we've sold them a sandwich, can we also sell them a drink? If we've sold them a scarf, can we also sell them a hoodie? So there are so many things, and we did a Basket Case Clubs episode. Actually, we did a whole mini-series on financial management. So go and check that out, and I'll give you the link at the end of the session. But Basket Case Clubs is where we go, and there was a mini-series where we really unpack this in a lot of detail. Running special promotions so that if, for instance, you're wearing the beanie, the scarf, and the hoodie, and you're at a game day on Friday night, you'll win a $50 canteen voucher, which doesn't actually cost $50, but it has encouraged more people to buy more stuff. So I'm talking on average here. You don't have to sell more to everyone. It's just, can we increase overall upsells so that that increases our cost of our income from those diversified revenue streams by just 1%? And I reckon the answer is yes. So just those four things alone make a massive difference. So let's now go back to the beginning. Before I show you the fifth and final one, let's go back to the beginning and say, let's say that our club is running on $100,000 a year income. So that's not insignificant. So, we've got an income of $100,000, and let's say that our costs, our direct costs and our overheads, so our total running expenses are $90,000. So we've got $100,000 income, $90,000 of expenses, gives us a profit or a surplus of $10,000. Here's where it gets really, really interesting. If we do the first one and we increase our prices by just 1%, we're not increasing our costs at the same time or the same rate. So our income goes from $100,000 to $101,000, but our expenses stay the same. So the impact on profit then is not 1%, it's 10%, because we've increased our profit from 10,000 to 11,000. So in effect, that's an extra 10% profit for nothing, and nobody has noticed, and that is now money that we can use to grow. That's money that we can use to improve our services, improve our facilities, improve our people, improve our offering to our community. Let's continue. If we then reduce our overheads by 1%, that takes that down by $900. Let's round it up to $1,000. If we can sneak it, like I said, you can do a bit more. Let's call that $1,000. So now we've got $101,000 income, but only $89,000 expenses, which has increased our profit from originally 10,000 now to 12,000. Then we do it again by decreasing our overheads by another 10%, by another 1%, which drops it down to 88,000. So now we've got $101,000 income, $88,000 expenses, which is $13,000 profit. And guess what? We do it again by increasing the sales volume, by selling more. By just 1%, increases income from 101 to 102. Expenses have gone down from 90 to 88. Now we've got $14,000 profit, which is a 40% increase in profit by making a 1% change 4 times. So we've changed 1% 4 times and we've increased our profit by 40%. Now, I'm not telling you this because it's, I was going to say because it's exciting. It is exciting. I'm not telling you this because it's black magic. This is true. This works. Every time we have helped one of our clubs implement this, they have seen the results. Profit has gone up. And remember, profit is where growth lives. So if you want to scale, this is a great way to do it. Whether you want to scale in membership numbers, in quality, in service offering, this is how you can do it very simply. And if you don't have diversified revenue streams yet, and you can only increase membership pricing and overheads, for instance, that's still a 20% increase if you haven't done the other two. But what can you do? If you're not selling other things, are there other things that you can sell? And can you increase those? Great discussions to be having. So if you struggle at committee meetings because you're having discussions about who's up against the judiciary this week and who hasn't paid their fees, well, we can start to change elevate the sophistication of the conversations we're having at committee meetings to start to increase profit. Because when we increase profit like this, it all goes back to our members. That wonderful self-limiting factor of not-for-profitness means that at some point, it all goes back into us being better for our members. So then let's get to the final lever that we can pull. And this is starting to talk about understanding customer acquisition cost and customer lifetime value. So we do get a bit more sophisticated here, but remember that all of you are in business. What does it cost us? So if we look at CAC first, our customer acquisition cost. What are we spending on advertising, on marketing, on promotions, on lead generating to bring members into our organization? That's our customer acquisition cost. But if we're just looking at that in comparison to what we make from that customer in 1 year, we're missing the big picture. Because what we really need to understand is the customer's lifetime value. So imagine if you've got data that's good enough to say, if a child begins in our organization at age of 4 and they stay for 10 years, then we can add up all of the amount that their family has spent on membership fees, plus an average of what they're likely to spend in additional merchandise, in food and drink from the canteen, in an additional offering. So if we run holiday clinics and those sorts of things, again, that's more things that we're selling. We can then say that it's not the $303 that they're paying in year one, it's that times 10, plus there'll be some growth in there. So we're talking at least thousands of dollars per member. So if we understand that this member might make us, I don't know, $10,000 over time while they're a member for, say, 10 years on average, then we know that we can actually increase our marketing budget to acquire those members in the first place, because we know what they're going to do long term, what impact they're going to have long term on our bottom line, which is the profit that all gets invested back in what we do. So now to bring it all home, let's look at these, what I call the pillars of success, or the pillars of club growth. And there's a handful of them, and that's it. And I think that pretty much everything from every organisation fits in this handful of pillars. So let's start with what I think is the most important one: people. We need to make sure that the people involved in our club at every stage, whether we're level 0 right through to level 4, we need to make sure that the people are all on the same page, that we've got a great strategic plan, that we've got a great process for recruiting volunteers, we've got clear job descriptions for our volunteer workforce as well as for our paid workforce. We're managing our paid workforce appropriately, so we know that we've got to look after superannuation, we know that we've got to look after work health and safety. We're doing everything right. We're looking after our people. People can also include getting new people, so marketing can fit in there as well. How do we talk to our people? So that's marketing to get new members and to get new volunteers, but it's also nurturing our people when they're there. So what's the customer nurturing process? How do we keep them? How do we keep them engaged? How do we keep them happy? How do we keep them coming back? Then we move to governance. So governance is more than just a good constitution and making sure you're filling in your forms to Consumer Affairs or Fair Trading every year. It comes down to having the right structure. So what is our legal operating structure? What is our organisational structure? What are the lines of communication? What is our document hierarchy like? Do we have a solid constitution? Is that supported by some more operational bylaws or regulations? Do we have policies that protect our people? So here's the link, and everything links. So a whistleblower policy, for instance, a child protection policy, and a child and youth risk management strategy that makes sure that's part of governance that keeps our people safe. Then money. We can't have a good business without money, and money's not taboo. Money is really important because we need a great analogy here is our clubs, our community organisations are always on a journey. We never arrive. So let's take a charity that might do domestic violence support. We're never going to arrive at a community, I wish it was the case, but I don't think we're going to arrive at a community that doesn't need domestic violence support shelters. It'd be lovely if we were, but we're on a journey to continue to provide safety for people experiencing domestic violence. Now, money's not why we're doing that. Providing a safe space for people who are exposed to domestic and family violence, that's why we're doing it, to provide protection and safety for them. That's our journey. Money is like the fuel in the tank. We need fuel to continue on our journey, so we need to have money. So the levers exercise that we've just been through to show you what are those levers that you can pull is really important to understand the breadth of financial management required in an organisation. But now the diversification of revenue streams, I've not even touched on sponsorship in that one, for instance. What's the additional money we can make through sponsorship or partnerships? External advertising, which kind of links into sponsorships. What are the facility development projects that we can lean on grants to do, which leads us nicely into the next pillar of facilities. Where do we play? This can extend to equipment as well. So what are the physical assets that we need to be able to deliver what we do? We need to make sure that they are well planned and that we have a process for making sure that we can fund them now, plus if we have a lease, for instance, to meet our lease obligations. So that might be capital renewal. When this building deteriorates over time, it might be up to us to be able to fund bringing it back up to a fit for purpose condition. That might mean we've got to make sure that we've got a sinking fund, so linking back to money, so you can see they all link together. And then the final pillar here is operations. And so these are the systems and processes by which we run day to day, but they also get into the nitty-gritty of what we do. So for instance, I mentioned a high performance program, a junior development program. These are all parts of our operations. But the, if you like, off-field operations are just as important. How are we capitalizing on the use of AI? How are we making sure that our social media presence is really good? How are we making sure that the people who visit us via our website with the intent of becoming a member have a wonderful journey? These are all operational systems and processes that help us run. So there you go. That's a lot of information about scaling a community organisation or a club. This has got to be really one of my favourite topics to deliver. And it builds on where we left off last time with strategic planning. So I think that strategic planning is very high level. It's what are our goals? What is our intent? What's our purpose? Why are we here? If we want that to be successful, now we're coming down to the next level, which I call business optimization. And that's exactly what we've just been through. So our business optimization strategy projects cover those 5 pillars. That's what we unpack. Now, we've been doing this for 28 years. Our CPR group just turned 28 a couple of weeks ago. And we are so proud of the projects that we've been able to work on that have not only made a difference in the clubs, but more importantly, they have made a difference in the lives of the volunteers who run those clubs. That's what's most important. We don't work with clubs and associations. We work with people, because it's the people who are running those clubs and associations that need support, that need knowledge, that need assistance. If you think that this information would be of assistance to someone else, to another organisation that you are connected with, for instance, please get them in contact with us. Otherwise, all you need to do is scan that QR code there and leave us a review, because people would much prefer to read something that you're telling them about the value of this information, so that then they can be connected. So it's all about providing service to more people. So we would really love some 5-star reviews to help more people be able to find us. And as I promised, there's the link to Basket Case Clubs. So you can find Basket Case Clubs on Apple Podcasts, on Google Play, on Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts, or even on our website or at basketcaseclubs.com.au. The reason that that's important in this topic is, as I said, because of that whole chunk of the mini-series that we did on financial management, making more money. I'd love for you to make more money, because if you make more money, that self-limiting factor of not-for-profitness means that all of that money goes into you doing a better job for the community that you serve. Thank you very much for doing that job, by the way, and I really appreciate your time today, this afternoon, or this morning, depending on which side of the country you're on. If you've got any questions, if you're not already subscribed to us on our newsletter, make sure that you jump onto cprgroup.com.au and sign up for our newsletter there. And if there's any more questions, I'll hang around for another few minutes to answer them. But if you're watching a recording of this down the track, please feel free to send us an email at info@cprgroup.com.au or directly via the contact button on our website as well. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you all again next time.
Basket Case Clubs acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country on which we record, being Yugambeh, Turrbal, Jagera and Kabi Kabi land. We recognise their enduring connection to land, waters and culture, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to First Nations listeners.